Good evening. Welcome to the Los Altos History Show. I'm Virginia Carlson, and this is Gloria Bears, and we are your hosts for the evening. We are here to introduce you to some very interesting people. They are the elders of Los Altos, and they are people that are going to tell us stories this evening because they all grew up in Los Altos. Years before, hundreds of years before we even had books or radio or television, tribes and families would gather around the campfire in the evening, make a circle around the fire, and they would listen to the elders or the grandparents tell stories about their past. In this way, knowledge and wisdom was passed on to the children of the next generation.
We are going to continue that oral tradition. We are going to use the candle as our campfire and welcome the elders from Los Altos who will talk to us and share their stories. They will tell us about Los Altos when it was a tiny town site. They grew up here and lived here as children, and they have much to share with us. Let me introduce them to you. First, Sister Helen Costello, Armand King, Ruth Erickson, George Cummings, Evelyn Trodson, and Lucille Lewer. Welcome.
Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
We're very happy to have you here.
Thank you. Our first chapter in the story tonight is about the Depression. It was a period of time in our history, about 1930, when people were very poor and there were very few jobs. Ruth, can you tell us about the Depression?
When you hear people talk about the Depression, they're talking about the time when businesses and companies failed and men all over the nation lost jobs. And it was a very difficult time. Men found it hard to get enough money to supply their families with food, clothing, and housing. So many times they left their families to try to find work. The men who traveled by freight train were called hobos. And the men who traveled by walking on the highways and byways of our country were called tramps. And many times I remember tramps coming to our home and asking my mother if she had some work they could do in exchange for a good meal. She never turned them away. She always had some work to do, and they worked in the yard usually while she cooked them a good meal. We had a little table that we kept in the backyard, and that's where the tramps ate their meals. She set the table, and that's where they were. It was a very hard time for everyone, but my father was a businessman and was a part owner of a business that did not fail. So we were very fortunate, and we always had enough to share with somebody else like that. I think that covers that. Thank you. Sister Helen?
Yes, we lived in a very poor cottage on a ranch, and we had only 2 bedrooms with 5 children. 4 of the girls slept in one bedroom, my parents in the other. My brother slept out in the dining room in the back of the house. I remember so well that my mother would get up around 5 o'clock in the morning, and she would light the fire in the fireplace in the living room so that all the children could come in and get dressed there. We had no central heating in the house at all. We had, the meals were poor. I remember we never had a salad and dessert at the same meal, for example. And we had, we were poor, but we were extremely happy.
Yeah, my father was in the Depression, and he talks about the story where he went to his father-in-law and said that, Mr. Blibler, did you have some spare eggs that you could give me to go out and help his family, which was myself and my two brothers, and he would then go door to door selling these eggs. And that was pretty way to make some money, and it was a hard life in those days, and that was the only job he had at the time. I remember him telling stories about when he'd lost his, or got injured at one of the packing houses in the fruit processing plant, and they wanted him back the next day because there were 3 people in that yard waiting to take his job, and you just didn't miss a day's work. But I can remember some time of my own that when down at the old elementary school where you could buy lunch for a whole week for $1.25 for the whole week. So that was pretty. You know, times were hard when you buy lunch for 5 days for $1.25.
That's great.
Yes.
That's great. Okay, the busiest time in Los Altos was during the apricot harvest. Did we forget?
Yeah, we
forgot George.
Yeah, no, we forgot Evelyn and George. We wanted to have them.
I'm sorry. I
I
skipped that. I'm
Evelyn?
sorry.
Oh, my father moved us down to Los Altos, which is now Los Altos Hills, across from where the town hall is. He had planted an apricot orchard in 1923, and he moved us down in 1927, my brother and I and mother and himself. And we were there for 2 years before the Depression started, and no one wanted to buy his fruit. So he went to Petaluma and had them deliver 2,000 baby chicks. So we were kept very busy during the Depression because he would, we had to take care of the chickens, and then they became laying hens, and he brought his eggs to San Francisco to sell them. And we did that for about 6 years, but we were never hungry because we always had the chickens and the eggs to eat. So we were lucky. I never knew we were poor if we were.
Great. George?
I remember it seemed like everyone was poor. I went to college for 2 years, and I had to drop out because I didn't have sufficient funds. So for a while, I didn't do anything. I got a job at Gordon and Grabel's grocery store, and for $13 a week.
Wow.
And we worked long hours. On Saturday was the big day because there was a lot of people only shopped on Saturday. And we'd work on Saturday from 7 in the morning to 7 at night. We did a lot of delivering. I drove the delivery truck, and I got to know everybody in Los Altos by driving the truck and knowing what they were able to buy, because a lot of the orchardists, they had big mortgages and they lost their property, and their house and everything. And I forget what I was going to say now.
Remember about the bicycle? Remember about the bicycles? You told us once about the bicycles, and if you only got one.
Oh yeah. Oh, I remember. Yeah, I remember when I got my first bicycle. That was my grandmother brought it down to me, and that was a real something to have, and to keep it running was something else too. You would get the spokes would bend. You get a flat tire, and the big things about the Depression were that you learned, I thought it was good because you learned how to get along on the small things, and you learn how to entertain inexpensively. Like we played a lot of bridge, and that time the crossword puzzles came out, and then you'd work on them for about, not crossword, jigsaw puzzles. You'd work on them for about a week.
Oh, that's great, George.
Very
Thank you
interesting.
very much for sharing that with us. And now we're going to move to a little bit different subject. We're going to ask our elders about what family life was like in those days. I think it was very similar in some ways to our family life today, but in many ways very different. Lucille, can you start us out with that and tell us something about some of the day-to-day
Yes, I
activities
certainly
in your
can. Thank
family?
you. Yes, we all had to do our chores. That was extremely important. And each one in the family was assigned a certain amount of work to do each day. And that had to be done. So I would like to start out early because I like to play. So as soon as I came home from school, I did my chores, and that was feeding the chickens and getting the eggs. And that was important. And then I had to change my clothes, though, the minute I got home because I had my play clothes. Then you could clean up and put your clothes back on, your school clothes or something new, and go to the table. And dinner was always at 6 o'clock. And sometimes my brother would not get home in time, and that meant the girls had to do his chores. And his chores happened to be he had to take care of the cow and then the rabbits. So he was always a little late, especially on Saturday. That was a time he liked to play, get down the creek and do a little fishing, etc. So that's what I remember. And then we went into a time where we were interested in the holidays and Christmas. We did get a check from my uncle, Uncle Robert Bleibler from Texas, and it was probably $25. So we had to share that, 4 of us, and my father said that you should give a portion of that money because always give something to less fortunate people. So we decided how much it'd be. Well, if we each received $5, then we should give $5, which we did then. We gave $5. So that was it. Christmas was a time when Christmas was Christmas. You did not start Christmas right after Thanksgiving. Christmas started Christmas Eve. And we had, during the week, we made little things for the Christmas trees, and we fixed our popcorn, and we strung that, and different things, and we'd make little extra things. Well, my folks would put on the garlands and things that were, you'd have to have a ladder, etc. So we wouldn't see the tree until we got up early on Christmas morning, and that was so exciting. And we'd hold a couple little things out because we wanted those little special things on our tree. That was extremely important. So I remember that so well and how much. And then for gifts, you were allowed some clothes and one gift, just one. And that was one main gift and a stocking with little things in it. So we have to decide if I wanted a doll one year, that was the doll. And then next year, I had to wait for the doll buggy or the doll bed. But we had only one thing. So they wanted us to anticipate. You didn't have everything that you wanted. And that was one of the things was a plus. And I think that was good. And then I wanted to tell something about studying. When we studied, we had to use a big kerosene lamp. And that was in the middle of the table. I meant to say that earlier. And then at 6 o'clock, after we finished our dinner and had a little time to rest, then we all got around the table. And the 4 of us sat there with a big lamp in the middle. And by 9 o'clock, our eyes were so tired because we were looking, at that lamp all evening. So 9 o'clock was bedtime, and we cleaned up and everything, went to bed. 6 o'clock in the morning, we got up. It was getting up time. And so then we got ready for school. Another thing we would like to talk about at this time was the telephone. We had a party line, 4 of us on the party line. And you know how children are. We had 2 rings, and that was our line. And once in a while we'd hear a first ring or 3 and 4, and my mother said, "Now get off there. You don't listen to other people when they're talking. That's their line, and you know their line." So we'd get really in trouble. And then I was asked also, what about food? How did you get the food out of Los Altos at that time? I said, well, we had trucks that came out. We had a bread man came out, baker, with his goods, and we had an ice man bringing our ice. And in summer, we get 100-pound pieces of ice. And of course, when they pecked them off, we'd get the little pieces of ice. We just loved that. And then we would get 50 pounds in winter. So we'd have 2 times, we'd get 50 pounds. As far as the man coming with vegetables, we raised most of our vegetables. So we didn't use very many vegetables from him. But we did get our meat. And we had chickens, so we'd have chickens, and we had rabbits. So we had quite a bit of meat. However, we liked a little beef. So we had a 50-cent pot roast once a week, and we'd look forward to that. My mother would make something out of that 50-cent pot roast. But I remember that. She'd say, "And don't forget my 50-cent pot roast." So it was a very simple life, but a fun life.
And happy.
And happy life. And we didn't know that we didn't have everything because we had lots of food and we had a nice family. We got along beautifully. We were so happy.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. And who is next?
Who is next to talk about family life?
I don't know. I could probably say a
Okay.
little bit something I can remember. That I'm a little younger than these other ladies and gentlemen, but I can remember my mother, who was Lucille's sister. In the summertime, we'd go down to the Dobie Creek, and we'd wade in that creek. Now that creek ran water all year long. If you can, if you're us older people can remember that, and you could go fishing there. But Mom would take us down there, and we would pick blackberries from the creek, and she would spend most of the summer doing nothing but canning, because that's what we lived on in the winter, was the canned goods that everybody would can. You can your peaches, you can your apricots, you can your blackberry jam, your apricot jam, and this was a staple for the family, and that's what you lived on. Now also in the summer, I can remember going down to Sergeant's barber shop and having him give me what they call a slitsy. Now, I don't know what they call it now, but it was like a GI haircut where they took you down to nothing, you know. And that haircut, of course, would last you all summer long. I mean, you had enough money to buy one haircut at the summertime, and that was it. And maybe before the next school day or the Monday or Saturday before school started, you got the next haircut.
Right.
But that slitsy would last you all summer.
The whole summer. Well, you know, you did mention something about the orchards and having the fruit and everything, and we wanted to move on and talk about that too today.
All right. And Sister Helen, can you tell us something?
Well, in the because we raised apricots, that was the big thing. And when we were very little, they paid us to stay away from the dry yard because we were a nuisance. 5 of us were quite a nuisance, but we didn't stay away too long. And for many years, I ran the dry yard for my father. And around the 4th of July is when the whole crop would be harvested. And we had spent most of the year raising the apricots, irrigating, pruning, thinning, and so forth. And then everything would come together in about 2 weeks. And that was our livelihood. The 2 weeks, all our livelihood depended on that. So we were hoping for good crops. I remember very well the family, my parents would always say, after the fruit season, we'll get a new car. We waited a very long time for new cars. After the fruit season, we'll go on vacation. And then one vacation that we would go as far as Santa Cruz and rent a very poor house, and we'd stay a week there, and that was the vacation that we had. So but apricots were the livelihood, and we would dry them. We spent hours at nighttime. I would remember getting up. We had 7 sulfur houses, and we put the apricots in early in the evening, then have to get up about 4 or 5 hours later and fill up the take out the sulfur houses the apricots out and put the others in and keep them going. But the whole harvesting lasted about 2 weeks, and the rest of the year we were raising the apricots.
And Armand?
Their prices have accelerated by the time I was into fruit season. I was started probably about 1943 cutting apricots, and you cut probably from the age of 8 through 13 years old, and if you were really lucky you could get yourself 4 lugs a day. Now these were 45 to 50 pound lugs. These were not the small, these were the big cannery lugs, and you would get not the cannery fruit, you would get the dregs of the apricots. You'd either get the ground fruit, or you would get the green fruit, or you would get the blemished fruit, and from that is what you cut the apricots with. And as Sister was saying, that your whole summer was apricots. Well, I know that when I was a child, not only was summer your apricots, but also your school clothing was your apricots. And you would save that money and go downtown San Jose to the Hart's department store and get your school clothes. And for the $30 that you made for those 2 weeks, you'd get 4 or 5 pair of Levi's, your socks and your shoes, and you were outfitted to go to...
That was it.
That was it, yeah.
And for you, Ruth?
Well, apricots and prunes were in my family. I had 2 sets of grandparents who lived in the area, and one raised prunes and one raised apricots. The prunes were harvested much differently than apricots, because they were, you had to pick them off the ground, and the people who picked prunes really earned their money, which wasn't very much. And the pickers would take strips of burlap sacking and wrap it around their knees to protect their knees. And even at that, before the end of the season, their knees were just completely worn out. And it was a very, very hard time.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Now, finally, this evening, we're going to ask our village elders to give some advice to the children. So if you would think of something that you would like to say to the children of today, some of your knowledge, some of your experience, your wisdom to pass on, we'd like you to do that now. George, would you start, please?
Well, I think the most important thing is to consider the other person and to help people and to learn how to get along and to work hard at what you do, because improve your skills, because there's more room at the top than there is at the bottom.
You're right.
Thank you. Evelyn?
Oh, I agree with George. I think we were made to work hard, and I think the children today do persevere in their studies and in their work. And I would most especially advise the children to stay very close to their parents and their family, because in time of adversity, the people that will really help you are your mom and dad or your guardians, whoever are raising you. Just remember, they love you very much. That would be my advice.
Great. Lucille?
And I like to say, love one another. That is so much and so important for all of us. And to try to understand others. We're all different, and we know that. And as we get older, we recognize this more, and how we have to forgive others, because we want them to forgive us. And that is important. And there's going to be some adversity in your life, and you have to be strong and try to get along and see if you can't overcome anything that comes along in your life. Sometimes you'll find it difficult, but be strong.
Thank you, Lucille.
And friendly. If you're friendly, someone's going to be friendly to you. But if you're snooty, as they say, that's the way they're going to treat you, and you'll find that out. So be friendly, love one another, and be happy.
Thank you.
Ruth.
Thank you.
And my little advice to you is don't ever be afraid to stand up for what you know is right. And that's my
Advice.
words of wisdom.
Wonderful. Thank you. Armin.
Well, I was raised in Los Altos and had quite a Boy Scout upbringing. And I'd say that to get involved with your community, go out there and where you can be a help. Put your time in. It's going to come back to you in threefold because you're going to enjoy your community. You'll learn about the community. You'll know where the pardon the expression, the skeletons of the city might lie, but you'll enjoy living in Los Altos a little more.
Thank you, Armin. Sister Helen?
For about 25 years, I've been involved with a program called Handy Capables. And my advice is to try to be kind and understanding of people, there are many of them, with all sorts of physical handicaps. Many, many people in wheelchairs. Help them. Don't be afraid of them, but be kind to them. Secondly, I would like to suggest that you get very involved with community service. I have been, and that is the secret of happiness, helping others.
I want to say to all of you, thank you very much for all your wisdom
Yes,
and
thank
what
you.
you have shared with us. And to the Los Altos History House show audience, we want to say thank you for being with us, and we'll see you soon.